Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. I've got a really special guest on the show today, a master distiller, or actually banker turned master distiller. Before I introduce him, quick message from our sponsor. Today's episode sponsored by Barrels Ahead. Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Today, our D2C strategist, Bianca Harmon, is joining us. How's it going, Bianca?
Going really good, Drew. Very much looking forward to this episode.
Yes, today we have Adam Spiegel on the show. Adam's the president and master distiller of Corning and Company. Adam, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. It's one of those normal Northern California days where it starts at like 45, 50 degrees at 7 o'clock in the morning and then gets all the way up to 80, and we'll get down to 50 again in the evening. It's sort of like a picturesque, almost fall day. So I love it.
Those are my favorite mornings. I love it. I love a good crisp morning, but I especially love it when you have like a nice warm.
Yeah.
So like not afraid to put on shorts because you know it's going to get warm soon enough.
Got to wear layers. That is the Northern California way.
Oh, yeah.
They wonder why we always bring a sweater wherever we travel to, even if it's, the East Coast.
Because we know better.
Absolutely. So Adam, I kind of hinted at the start, you got your start in finance, if I'm correct. And
yeah.
Tell me about this shift from finance to distilling.
Yeah. So 2008, the world sort of melted in the financial world. I was technically working in the sort of financial sales side of things. I was working for a company that was managing money for foundations and endowments.
Wow.
And, I was in the sort of sales side of that whole world. And they invited, 600 people into a room and said, "You're all fired."
You're out.
And so I'm sitting out in the parking lot in sort of the Silicon Valley area where the office was, and realized I just didn't really have any sort of tangible skills. I didn't really know. And now I always make this joke that the zombie apocalypse was hitting and I didn't know how to kill any zombies. And so I was like, I got to figure out how to do something, right? So I
as well get them drunk.
Well, right. I mean, so that, I sort of fell into that, but, beer quickly turned into wine. And then, because wine season came around in Northern California and in this area, you can always buy some grapes and do what you want to do if you have the wherewithal and the interest. And then when you're done making wine, you've got leftover grape skins and twigs and berries. And so I made grappa.
Oh, wow.
Which is sort of a traditional Italian liqueur. You bought a little 15-gallon still off eBay. And then after that, all whiskey starts as a beer base. So for us, it was like, oh, great. Well, why don't I start making some whiskey? And, again, it was taking some beer and running it through and seeing what happened. And eventually sort of realized that the stuff we were making tasted pretty good and, how we can make it better and what are the things we could do differently. And so myself and an old business partner, we sort of founded this thing in 2010. And honestly, when we first started, there really wasn't many people doing it. We were the 15th distillery in California. Now there's like over 200 now. Within the first couple hundred in the United States, and now there's 2,300 and growing. They say almost a distillery is still opening almost every day.
Isn't that amazing?
It is, yeah. And so, not just crazy entrepreneurs like myself, but there's a lot of people who sort of fall into this whole thing. And so, yeah, we've been doing it now for 12 years, and we've grown our business from what used to be a little 800 square foot facility, and now we're cresting around 40,000 square feet. So,
oh man,
it's pretty cool.
Now, did you enter in and did you sell beer and wine or?
No, it was all for internal consumption, friends, family, fools, that sort of thing. It was good. Lucky for us, and this is something that I sort of say would not have been available to us in the generation before it, is that there was, homebrew shops everywhere. I mean, this was sort of before the whole homebrew, craze sort of hit in the early, 2010, 11s, 12s. We were on it. We were talking to people, and you can go in there and talk to the homebrew guys like, hey, man, this went wrong. What could I do differently? And, there's one place up in Santa Rosa called Beverage People. The Beverage People did a terrific job of just like letting us in there, answering some good questions. They even provided little hobby barrels if you wanted to barrel age your beer or whatever you got into. So that sort of stuff was really great. And I think we just wanted to do something cool and something different. And, in our area, Northern California is sort of so ripe with great wine and great beer and great weed and great food. So it's like you've got all this sort of stuff happening people are always like, what's this next industry? What's this next thing that we can take and sort of evolve? And so I feel like whiskey is sort of a natural thing for us to be thinking about.
Yeah, it's absolutely blown up. I can tell. I'm down in Southern California, and over the last 10 years in northern San Diego here, there's at least 4 distilleries within 2 miles of my house.
Easily.
And I've asked a few other small craft distillers, and yours is one of the first to pop up in California. What was it like getting a license back then to do a distillery?
It was interesting. A lot of it was just like no one really knew what to do. There wasn't really a playbook. Nowadays it's sort of like from start to finish, what you got to do to kind of get your distillery going. When we first started, I didn't really have a playbook. And so one of the things we did know is like how we wanted to make our product. We were using a direct fired still at that time. We knew we wanted to make it using a sort of a traditional style still, which called an alembic. And we knew that we want to do it in Sonoma County. So we started looking at all the different cities and municipalities in this area and said, hey, what can we do? Here's what we want to do. Will you talk to us? The majority of cities were like, nope. And then this one city, which is the city we ended up founding ourselves in, called Rohnert Park, had never heard of a distillery, never had one before. And they were like, come on in, let's talk. And, it was a little bit of a learning curve because they thought we were taking like vats of gasoline and like dumping it over a fire. Teaching them that was not really how that works, and that these things are non-pressurized vessels, so they're not, ideally it should never blow up because it should never have any pressure at all. If there's any pressure, it's a problem. So those sort of lessons, I think, moves us into a place where we were able to be like honest and work really well with them. And filling out the TTB license was a little bit of a chore, and bouncing around between liquor lawyers was always sort of an interesting thing. And I think just by being sort of humble and honest and just asking really good questions and working hard, we were able to get it going. And it took us a little less than a year to get all the licensing founded. We sort of made our first bottle in late 2010, early 2011. And it was interesting. It was a really cool place to be. And lucky for us also, we didn't really start off not knowing how to run a still or not knowing how to like cook a mash or any of the sort of the things that were like really important to creating this thing.
Yeah.
What's it like being in Sonoma County when you're surrounded by all of these wineries and then you are the sole distillery?
It's cool. I mean, so there's always been a natural point between wine and distilleries, right? Brandy, right? Cognac and that sort of world has always had a really good relationship with the wine world. One of the master distillers that I work with starting in 2013 and 14 was a guy named Hubert Germain Rabon. He started up Germain Rabon Distillery in Ukiah, California. So, and he came from traditional cognac, obviously cognac starts as a wine base. So, there is a lot of that, but, the running joke has always been like a lot of good wine is made with a lot of good beer, and a lot of good beer is made with a lot of good whiskey, and a lot of good whiskey made a lot of good wine, sort of this little loop of folks. And so, we've had a good rapport with a lot of people here, people, you get palate fatigue just like anybody else. And especially the consumers did too. When we had our tasting room going, that was such a vibrant scene because people would show up with like the red teeth. You could tell they've been wine tasting for like 2 or 3 days. And
did you offer them the wine wipes when they got there?
No, we should have, that would have been smarter, but we just like, we got you, like drink some water. Your palate's probably had a whole bunch of like heavy tannic reds, like we'll help you out. And so that worked out really well. It allowed us to have like a really good sort of contrast to what you typically thought of in this area. And, we put our name on the map early, but really we sort of kept our heads down and we're sort of like myopically focused on making just really good whiskey. We didn't spend a lot of money on marketing the last 12 years. We've done a little bit of this from time to time. It's sort of a feast or famine situation on the marketing side, but we are now starting to let people know we exist and who we are. And we've been able to put some money into some of the things that, the accoutrement that helps you sell stuff. And now I'm feeling like, all right, well, now we can sort of let the world know we're here. And, we actually sort of became one of the largest whiskey distilleries, not just in our area, but really in Northern California, if not most of California. I mean, we're making more whiskey than most people. Most is for our own brands, though. Nowadays, we're also making it for other people too.
Yeah, talk to me about your brands. So when you launched, you started, I like on your LinkedIn, you talk about how you're the refounder.
Yeah.
Quaker Company. Now, what was the decision to make like a parent company? Did you have the vision to go to multiple brands?
Yeah. So certainly not when I initially started, and not to like, make it sound like I had this master plan for 12 years, but in 2014, 15, and 16, I started working with a new business partner. My old business partner and I sort of went our separate ways in 2013. I was on my own for a little while in 14, and then in 15, 16, I picked up a new business partner. And he and I have always had this dream of like growing our facility much bigger and bigger. And Corning actually was a relation to my new business partner, Sam's great grandfather, who used to own the distillery in Peoria, Illinois.
Oh,
And that was always a house of brands. They had a bunch of stuff they made, some stuff you never really realized they used to make. And they were one of the largest distilleries in the United States in the early 1900s.
oh, wow.
And we took the Sonoma Distilling brand, which is one of the ones that we make, and we sort of parked it as a brand versus having it be the company name.
Okay,
also,
so you had the Sonoma Distillery, and then you kind of like moved it under the Corning and Company.
Exactly. So it's one of the 3 that we currently have. There are more coming
Sure.
that we'll be releasing as part of our product mix, our family of brands. And some of that has to do with just the idea of wanting to not have, when people do contract work with us, they don't get a bill from Sonoma Distilling Company because that's a brand. It's sort of like it's its own little thing. Some of it was just like also just the idea of
Smart.
giving brands their place. It's like a brand should have the attention it needs when you're talking about the ethos that's associated with how you make that thing. So for the Sonoma Distilling brand, which these are some of our newer bottles, we have them right here.
Oh, that's slick.
Yeah, thanks. But for like this product, it requires grains grown for the most part in California, distilled on a traditional pot still, made in-house from grain to glass. Like that's the rules of this particular brand. But another brand that we have releasing early next year called Old Quaker, that's a source brand. That's one that we can buy from other places. We can make some of it in-house. We can do a combination of things, and it doesn't have to follow the same set of rules. And so, you want to be able to have brands sort of have their own story, have their own ethos, and so that you can stay true to the container that you give that particular brand.
Absolutely. And in the distilled category, probably even more so than wine and beer, is that a lot of the distilleries, you even look through Ireland, you look at the Bardstown distillers, they all have multiple brands under them. So you're really following a tried and true model for spirits.
Exactly. And then again, going to the contract work we're now doing for other people too, it's contract distillation, contract barrel management, contract bottling. We can help a person who's like, hey, listen, I want to start a brand. I have some marketing background, but I have no idea how to like make whiskey. Like we are taking those people and saying, listen, we'll teach you, we'll put together a business plan with you. We'll help you create some inventory. We'll help you bring a route to market. We actually have a sales team that we're affiliated with now too. So we have this sort of like full service that we can provide. We sort of let those people like really do their strengths, which I think, as somebody who was in this game 12 years ago, kind of doing a little bit of everything, like I recognized early on that like trying to do everything is not the way. Like stay what you're good at. Like right now, being a master blender, master distiller, that excites me. That gives me the excitement to go to work every single day and do different things and try new stuff. And that's what I want to do the rest of my life. Right.
Yeah.
So
stepping back, like you mentioned, master blender, master distiller. How did you make the educational leap from grappa maker to master distiller?
Yeah. And honestly, it was a title that I've had a little bit of apprehension about actually using. I've always said that I think whiskey's going to take me the rest of my life to really master. And the good news is I'm young, so I'm not worried about it. I mean, I started this distillery up in my mid 20s, and now I'm in my late 30s, and I'm like still doing it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But the cool part is that like, it's about knowledge accrued, right? So it's all this information that I've been learning over the last 14 years unprofessionally, 12 years professionally, right? So this ability to be able to like learn it all, do stuff. And then some of it has to do with just like, a little bit of being able to, I always said it's sort of like if I could smell a mash, originally where a whiskey comes from and sort of understand and taste it, what it's going to taste like when it's a fully aged whiskey, that's sort of that light bulb moment where you're like, oh, like, I've learned that. I've gone through enough iterations of this thing. I've figured out a whole bunch of stuff. I've learned a bunch of stuff. And that's a mastery in itself. And so I become less focused on that title being something that defines me, but something that more about like my commitment to this thing, which I really want to continue to do. And I've been really excited for that. And, I think it's a humbling thing, right? It's, it's like, I'm a master, put my pants on in the morning guy, or put my pants on in the morning person or something, I mean, I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do have to admit that I've had more than a few bottles of your whiskey.
Oh, thank you.
I go, particularly, there's always a whiskey for a time and place. And I do a lot of camping on the Russian River. And I seem to always swing by on the way up as I drive up the coast and get a bottle. So I just enjoyed your rye, actually, this year on the camping trip.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we like that. And that's always the fun part. That was the stuff that really got me excited about this world, is sort of like the celebratory part of it all, the family, you're celebrating good times and bad times. One of the things I always recommend to people sometimes is to get like a special bottle for something. And especially if they open it up, it's like right on the back, the thing that they opened it up for. So like my brother's birthday or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And like have it on there, because when you go back and you grab it, because whiskey can stay in the liquor cabinet, doesn't have to be drank within 24 hours or 72 hours like wine does, right? So go back to it again, you're like, oh yeah, we drank this my brother's birthday, we went camping in the Russian River. Like that kind of stuff is fun. And sometimes bottles don't last that long, which is also fine too. But I mean, that's really about it. I just love the idea of the sort of the history and the celebratory part of it all. And now we're getting into the holiday season. I mean, this is really our time of year to shine. People always say that like October, November, December is like whiskey time. So you'll see a lot of us sort of scrambling and selling a lot of booze and talking a lot, because it gets cold and people want to do stuff. It's Thanksgivings and Christmases and Hanukkahs and Halloween, like all the sort of stuff that you want to have something nice and warm for.
Sure.
Are you guys in any of the restaurants out in Sonoma County?
Yeah, totally. So it's a little bit of, we're not everywhere, which, at some point, I think, it's been the one area that I've always sort of been interested in. It's like, a lot of the bars and restaurants tout their local food, all their local purveyors and their local this and their local that. And then you go to buy a cocktail and it says like, Jack Daniels and whatever.
Right.
You're like, what? I mean, so that's been the one area that I think has a lot of room for growth, which, also has to be commensurate with, you have to have lots of whiskey to be able to do that too, which is, I guess, is also good now that we have been able to ramp up production over the last 12 years and we have a lot more availability than we ever did before. But it's been an area of contention where it's like, why are we not in more places? Why are not more people using our stuff on the regular? Because we also price it, I think, pretty affordably as well. It's certainly not as cheap as everyone else's.
Now,
But I mean, we have some. We have, a lot of the Stark State Group places have got us in their places. So we're very lucky in Sonoma County. We've got some local folks like them who've picked us up and put us in a lot of spots. Then they have some locations up in Healdsburg and stuff as well. Some of the higher end places like Matheson's has got us in, and Villette's and Healdsburg. You go down to like Brewster's in Petaluma and Mario and John's and sort of like all the little stomping grounds in Petaluma area, Sally Tomatoes here in Rona Park. So yeah, we have a nice little local following, but yeah, we're always trying to find new spots, right? It's like, why not?
How do you go about expanding your reach?
Yeah. And also I think a good thing that's come out of COVID, not that there's been like a ton of good stuff that's come out of COVID, but I think one of the good things that's come out is that like we all sort of went home, right? And then we started drinking at home. When we were all drinking at home, like we weren't grabbing like the crap, we weren't using crap stuff to make cocktails, because like you had like a couple of cocktails at home and you were like using like either a gift you got from a family friend, or you're going out to the store and buying something that would last you a little while, and you weren't spending all that money at the bar or restaurant. And so I think we all sort of premiumized, the premiumization of whiskey occurred because like we all recognized like we're not going to go back. We're not going to go to a bar and be like, yeah, give me your crap. Like whatever you got, just throw it in a bottle and a glass, I'll drink it. And so I hope that that's going to continue, right? Because I've always said it's quality over quantity, right? If you can use one or two good cocktails in a night versus two or three crappy ones, like the price is the same either way, or maybe a little less. So why not go ahead and use something you like, and then at least it tastes good.
Sure. Let's talk about your whiskey for a second. I really want to kind of figure out how you ramped up and how you expanded production, especially being with an aged spirit. How did you get your first releases out to market?
So we stayed focused on making just whiskey from day one. So no gins, no vodkas or anything else like that.
A lot of people will do like the unaged vodka or the unaged whiskey, the first release or so.
Yeah, totally. So we started with little tiny barrels to start. We initially started with little 3-gallon barrels, became 5 gallons, became 10s, and then 15s, and then 30s. So as time went on, our barrel size got bigger. And working with Hubert, one of the things that we talk a lot about was like not over oaking the spirit. So like a 3-gallon barrel could go like for 3 or 4 months and it was done. A 5-gallon barrel could go for like 6 or 7 months and it was done. A 10-gallon, and vice, so it's usually it was like a gallon per month was usually the trick to be the floor. And then it was sort of just ever so slightly above that. And that's the minimum, right? Just not to over oak it. And our whiskeys, even today, they taste good. They taste round and ready to go to bottle. They're just not old, right? We don't have a ton of old whiskey. Even today, using the standard 53-gallon barrel size, or sometimes we'll use a quarter cask, which is a 30-gallon barrel. We end up releasing whiskey that's a minimum of 2, it's all straight, but realistically it's 3, 4, and 5 years old.
Okay.
And so even our stuff today doesn't have that over oakiness, doesn't taste too tannic. So we're trying to, it's sort of, in many ways, we're trying to fight the oak, because that's just, that's sort of the story of whiskey. It has to go into a new char American oak barrel for a lot of American spirits. So
yeah, for bourbon, you're going to be that way.
Bourbon, rye whiskey,
like the Irish style, or a lot of the European whiskeys they don't have that heavy wood treatment.
Different rules, exactly. So single malts, Irish whiskeys, a lot of stuff you can use casks, which gives you a much more softer environment. The wood is nicely primed for long-term maturation. You get some good oxidization, just like you would anywhere else. But what you don't get is you don't get that oak bomb. A lot of the color you see from our whiskey, I mean, if you look at a whiskey like this, like it's got a lot of color just strictly from the new char American oak barrel. And that's really what's driving that flavor profile.
Yeah. So the light on the oak, let the whiskey part come through. Where do you source your grains? And
so the majority of our grains come from California, largely in the Sonoma County area. This year is going to be a challenge because of the drought. We are finding some of our grain providers, we work with a lot of farms all over the state, and they're saying, listen, we are at 50%, we're at 40%, we had 60% loss this year. No joke. And so what that's doing is pushing up the price of our grains dramatically, right? The supply and demand. And then at the same time, it's just making some grains not available. And so for the first time in a long time, we're gonna have to start buying some grains out of the state on more of a consistent basis, which is maybe okay too. It's sort of like a vintage, though our whiskeys sort of get blended, so you may not even really taste it anyway. But for the most part, if I did stuff as, a bottled and bond 4 years or 5 years from now, like it's a time and place. It happened, this time was difficult for people to source grains and source water. And so now we're at a place where it's like, what do we do? Where do we get stuff? So majority of our grains come from California, and obviously the water is coming from our area. Lake Sonoma is our water source. It comes out of our taps here. And then we use a water source from Cobb Mountain spring water, which is how we proof it down from cask strength to bottle strength. So we have to add water from a barrel to a bottle. So we just use a local water source. It brings a little bit of minerality and flavor. And as a kid, I used to drive up to Lake County, and the hippies sort of selling the water on the side of the road. I always had that medicinal value to it or whatever. But that was, it's
further emphasizes the sense of place.
It really does. Yeah. I mean, that's always the part about when you start up your own business, regardless of whatever it is, in particular, also spirits, is that it's so much of who you are gets sort of transformed and interweaved into this whole thing. And so like little stories like that. And, the other day I was doing a whiskey tasting, and someone saw one of our tasting notes that my cherrywood rye, I wrote like new leather on there. Like, why new leather? I was like, well, this whiskey reminds me of like a 1984 Volvo. And they're like, totally get it. Like, I don't even know how that memory, like this worked, but like, that's sort of the really fun part about distilled spirits. It's such a, memory driven, experiential experience. And so at that moment we connected, and they're like, oh, totally get it. 1984 Volvo. You should put that on the tasting notes. I was like, okay.
Absolutely. And so much experimentation. You mentioned your cherry wood. Talk to me about some of your wood experiences. I know as a reference, I was back and do a lot of whiskey tasting, but right before COVID, I was toured the Jameson Distillery in Ireland, and they've got a micro distillery there, Method Madness. When you're at that distillery, they must have 40 different distillates with all different woods. It was really neat to go through all the different types of casks.
Yeah, so we have a smoker on site. So we smoke our malted barley with California cherry trees. So that's how you get our cherrywood smoked bourbon and our cherrywood smoked rye. And that is how we differentiate those products, because that smoky flavor comes through nicely. It adds a nice chewable smoke to it. People who also like smoky scotches, it's a really good sort of liaison for those who want to try something a little different. And
it's not so much cherrywood aged, it's actually the rye, like almost like a peated. It's cherry.
Exactly. It's like we went from a different direction rather than going with a peat, which is like a moss, and it burns a little bit differently. The cherry wood.
We don't have a lot of in Sonoma, so
we don't. There is some though, and there's been people who've asked me if I wanted to make some, and I was like, maybe. I don't know. I feel like sometimes you can leave stuff for the purists, right? Like leave stuff in the peat for the scotch. Maybe, I don't know. But it is interesting. There is, so just to sort of close that point. Yeah, I mean, the cherry woods are local because we get local cherry trees. You know, these cherry trees are grown typically in Stockton, California. So we get this nice local cherry tree in. We dry age the wood. We cold smoke the malted barley for about at 90 degrees for about 40 hours. And that's how you get all that smoky flavor into the grains. You're turning the grains every single day. And then you use those grains to make your whiskey. And so that's how the smokiness gets in there. And I think some of the best selling products we have are our cherry woods these days. Actually, those seem certain times of year, certain markets, like where we've never heard of us before, they're like, oh, makes total sense. Like bacon and barbecue, got it. Makes perfect sense. So yeah, I think we're trying to hit that foodie drinker a little bit. We're trying to hit that person who wants to experiment and try new things and cares about not just buying like the big guy whiskey, but maybe also wants to try like a little person whiskey too. Well, and you know, we're doing our thing.
Yeah. Well, as far as all your experimenting, I mean, cherry was a success, but I always like to say, in all your experiments, is there anything that went really awry? And I'm never going to make that.
Yeah, one time we attempted to blend apple juice in with a whiskey and make sort of like an apple whiskey. I was visiting a friend of mine in Denver who's got a distillery called Leopold Brothers, Todd Leopold, and he makes an apple whiskey there similarly but different. His execution is much better. And we tried it and it was like, ooh. And it wasn't that it was bad. It was just that like the pectin and the apples like separated in there and it looked like a giant snow globe and it settled out really like if you let it sit there in a tank, like all the juice would flow up on top and there was this like, you could like pump it out, but you would lose a lot of alcohol in all of the solids underneath. And so
you were decided you're just going to stick with the ones you're good at smoking.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or just put it on the shelf and be like, okay, well, you know, in hindsight, I probably would have filtered the juice first, and that helped me avoid some of the sponification and the weird solids that occurred. And you know, we didn't lose a lot. We actually, the funniest thing we did is in the end, because the whiskey was already like 3, 4, 5 years old, and then we blended it with the apple juice. We threw it through a still. We actually distilled it again.
Oh, okay.
Made this like really weird like apple whiskey distillate that I think we put back in barrel. Where the heck is that? I have no idea where it is.
Fantastic now.
I mean, I bet you it is, because when you distill stuff that's been aged out too, like all of those like wood tannins actually come through. Like you could taste, it's like an unaged spirit, but it tastes old, but it doesn't have any color, and it's like weird. I don't know.
That would be wild.
It was wild. It was
wild.
We
had not a distillery, but we had a meadery on the other day, and I asked them what they would never do again, and it was ferment watermelon. Apparently it doesn't work. Fresh watermelon, great. Don't ferment it.
Was that a local meatery?
Yeah, it was down in San Diego. It was
Temecula.
Temecula meadery. That's right.
Very cool. Yeah. That's an interesting little industry too. I mean, I have some friends of mine in Vermont who they're called Bar Hill, and they make gins and vodkas out of honey, which is really exciting and fun.
Yeah.
There's a local one here called Hedron, which does like a cuvee style, like a really dry, sparkling mead, which
sounds really good.
Pretty delicious. I mean, and it's really cool as I sort of talk about local stuff, like you get a chance to try different honeys from different places. And so like they have one that's like a carrot and a rutabaga and like a macadamia nut. It's like whatever the bee touches grabs so much of that flavor out, and then you try and you're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's some interesting stuff there.
I like it. What terroir, what they call it, I guess. Like it's like primal terroir.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about your distribution. So you sell your whiskeys online, but is most of it through the 3-tier?
It has to be, yeah. So we are no longer what's considered a craft distiller in the state of California, because we took out an importer's license so we can bring other products in from other states and other countries and bottle it here in California.
So does that mean you're not allowed to have a tasting room?
Well, we can have one. It's just we can't really monetize it because I can't sell bottles directly. So currently under California current law, now of course, hopefully that will change one day.
That needs to evolve.
Oh, totally. You know, if you make more than 150,000 gallons a year, which is like a fly on a fly's butt compared to the big guys, we are considered a big distillery. And so we can't sell bottles directly. And so all of our stuff goes to the 3-tier system. We sell it to either a distribution point on the East Coast or our retailer here in California, ship it through our website. And so if you buy a bottle on the website, which we totally encourage people to do, you know, sonomadistillingcompany.com, not my shameless post, but if you want to buy bottles on our website, depending on where you are, it will ship from one of those 2 places, and everybody gets their tax money. They're super happy about it. We lose 50% of our margin, But at the end of the day, it's a good way for us to expand our network, expand what we do. Currently, we're only in 12 states for distribution, though. So we're in.
Who do you use for the out of state?
So right now, we use a company called Big Thirst for that one, and they do a lot of that work through our website. And then in our distribution network, we work with both distributors, big and small. So we're with RNDC in California and other states. We're with Breakthrough in a couple of markets, which is sort of another medium to big size distributor. We're some smaller guys in places like Texas and Missouri and Minnesota, Michigan. But as time goes on, we're going to continue to sort of grow our network. And we really don't want to be everywhere yet because we don't have enough volume. And so much of our business is just like, if we go into a market, we need to have boots on the ground to be able to support it. I always used to hate when people would just like sell a bottle to a retailer and be like, all right, well, let me know how it goes. It's like, I want to work that market. I want to go out there and say hello and do like things like whiskey dinners and in-store tastings and that sort of stuff. That's, if you don't like doing that sort of stuff, like you're just in the wrong game. Like that's what this business really truly is at its core.
Yeah. Talking about California law, it is amazing that you grow to a certain size and you can no longer have a tasting room. And then there's such a model across the United States, like especially back, in Kentucky, with all the big distilleries all being able to do distillery tours and connected with restaurants and that whole like whiskey trail tourism.
Yeah, some of it is just that the biggest opposition to change is really the distributors. And I'm not speaking ill about them. I wouldn't say anything to them. I wouldn't say to their face. I think that there's a misconception that like, if we sell bottles directly, it will mean less bottles that they have to sell. And if anything, like if I make more margin selling bottles directly, ultimately that means that I gain more money for R&D and money for benefits for my employees and more money for, if I do my job right and I sell some bottles and it's like, it makes sense, I'm going to continue to go through distribution indefinitely.
Yeah.
I don't have the ability to sell. I don't have the ability to pay 100 salespeople in the state of California like RNDC does, right? So they're the best salespeople or best fulfillment house I could possibly have because they got trucks and cars and people and all sorts of stuff.
Sure. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Gareth Moore. He's head of the Virginia distillery, and he's just setting up his big facility, and they also can't. So it was really, they have the third party. When you buy a bottle at the Virginia distillery, you're actually buying through the third party that's not part of the distillery. And then they have to figure out the cutback.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I would even take that if I could. I mean, just because of the amount of tourism we get through Sonoma County, we used to see people all the time. It was such a fun, I also miss that, like that laughter and noise and people having fun and like that look on people's face when you teach them about something. That was a really fun part of having a tasting room. During our little COVID pivot, we used to do virtual tastings. So that was a big thing. We still do today, but
how do you conduct those?
So it's through Zoom. So it's similar to a thing like this where we'll work with a group of, anywhere from 20 to 200 people, depending on the biggest one I did was 155 people. And we ship the cases through our third party system. So they would go through, we can ship to 40 states and we have our virtual tasting kits, which are like a 4-pack and it has some grains and a glass and a pipette and a little tasting mat. And we ship it all on our website, and they would basically work with my marketing team to set up a tasting. And they get me for like an hour and we go through, we conduct a tasting and I teach them about how we make whiskey from grain to glass and what that means. And it really was a good COVID pivot. Initially, we were like, we'll sell a couple hundred of these and sort of like, and then we ended up selling thousands of them, which was really great. And we still do them. There's some companies who still use us as like their like comic relief. Like I go into like a sales meeting, and no joke, I'll go into a sales meeting for like 15 minutes. I'll do like a high level tasting. And then it was like, all right, thank you for coming to our sales meeting. Bye, Adam. And I'll just leave. And it works great. And it works. It's a really good way to, as an icebreaker. It's not traditional, like a wine tasting.
Yeah.
And, we can ship to 40 states now. So it's like, we're all game. It's a great opportunity for us.
Oh, absolutely. So the company will purchase all these tasting kits for all the people that are on the call or in the meeting.
Exactly. They'll ship them with enough lead time to get to them, and we set up a Zoom.
Oh, that's a great idea. And continue this kind of conversation about talking about community. You've ramped up a club. Talk about your club.
Yeah, so it's not a traditional club in the sense that we require people to buy bottles on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. There's no cash commitment. Really what it is sort of like you're in the inner circle. So we have a release of some cool stuff twice a year. You're going to get notice about it first. You're going to have a club page you can go to buy it from first. It allows us to have that sort of that direct interaction, because I'll do like a tasting on there. So I'll invite the club to show up at a Zoom, and they can ask questions if they like. And we don't provide discounts because, again, we're losing money through the 3-tier system. So fundamentally, we can't fundamentally do that because of just the margins associated with doing it. But it does allow us to connect with people now in different states, and release new products and sort of get some like direct, honest feedback. Like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, how have you used it? Like, I'm going to encourage people during our club releases to like make cocktails with it and throw it on their website and tag us at Sonoma Whiskey, and like those sorts of that sort of community we can build. And it's small right now. We're a couple hundred people deep, but I think as time goes on, again, because there's no cash commitment, because it's just
you sign up, but you don't really have to buy anything. You just get access to these limited releases.
And when it sells out, right? We release, a single barrel of 150 bottles.
Yeah, talk to me about some of these limited releases. What can people expect?
So it can be sort of one of two things, or maybe three things. So it's like the mainstay stuff we have fresh batches of, which are like, I just did a blend of my rye whiskey or my cherrywood rye or whatever, and we put that on the website. And then it's other things like single barrels, which are like, rather than doing a full blend of like 2,000 or 3,000 gallons, I'm taking a 30-gallon barrel or a 53-gallon barrel, and I'm dumping it in to a tank and then bottling it as its own unique expression. Sometimes it's brand new releases. So at some point next year, we're going to try releasing like a bourbon cream, for example. Like, we made a small batch of it. Love to get some consumer feedback on it. The club has first access to it, sort of like a Bailey's style that we can make here. Or we do other small releases, like we have a black truffle rye whiskey we release once a year, which uses real French Périgord black truffles in it. Yeah, or like a wheat whiskey, which I'm literally blending right now. So stuff like that we can just release in small enough lots, and it doesn't really detract from who we are, and it lets people sort of stay connected to sort of the nuance of what we can do. Once we do our jobs right and people like it, we'll start releasing it to the general public. We'll make more of it. We can start ramping up production if we need to pretty quickly.
I think that's an excellent idea for all distilleries. I wish more were doing it. There's one distillery I do belong to, their barrel club, Malahat. They're down by me, and they're always doing something very experimental. And then the best stuff always makes it out, or they'll do the higher proof versions for us.
Yeah.
And I think the last one was, they do a lot of collabs with breweries.
Yeah, I've seen the ones with the whale on the label, right?
Yeah, they got the whale.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I respect that. I mean, again, this is why we want to be a craft distiller, even if I'm not legally labeled as one in the state of California. Like, I'm still tiny. So yeah, we want to have that direct connection. We want to be able to stay small. And even if we go to scale up, like, I'm doing it the hard way. Like, none of these products, unfortunately, are going to have the buzz name or the peanut butter whiskey or the thing that people are all of a sudden going to be like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Let's tell all our friends tomorrow.
I think that's good, though. I think that's good.
Well, and again, because it's a long game, right? Like, I've met people at trade shows and in the tasting room and randos who just stop by the distillery. And I've got a chance to get to know people for years, almost in some cases a decade, and they've seen our growth and they know who we are, and I can connect with them, and they can sort of say they've seen us, they've tasted us. Some stuff they've absolutely loved, some stuff they've been like, eh. And so that's been really good to have that long vision for how to build clients, because that's really what whiskey is. I mean, if you go to a traditional Scottish distillery, you go to distilleries in Kentucky, these are not new distilleries. They've been around for a long, long time, and they've gone through it. They figured a lot of stuff out a century ago, and now it's just a matter of repetition and trying to continue to move the chains ever so slightly.
Yeah. As you're growing, what sort of growing pains does a distillery face as they reach the different thresholds from the first batch? You've lost your craft. Now you had to stop the tasting room. Talk to me about the growing pains.
The only
challenges.
Yeah, the challenges. I think the challenges that we've had are things like, I mean, there's stuff inside and outside our control. COVID was a real swift kick in the crotch. The ability to not sell directly, that also didn't help much either, because I really felt like we were building some nice momentum here on site. But also, like, we're in wood shortages right now, or a drought in the state of California. I mean, these are challenges that everybody's facing. But like, it just sort of seems like when we start catching some momentum, it's like, and it's like, it's just like, you're like, every time you're like,
a lot of external influences.
Exactly. It's like, I finally thought I was at the top of the hill, and now I'm just rolling back. But so you got stuff like that, that's sort of inside and outside control. And then it's also just, like growing pains of like not having enough supply to be able to be in 30 markets, 50 markets, not having enough, a ton of money to be able to put into 100 salespeople throughout the United States and try to blow this thing out. Another challenge we ran into, so this is a new custom glass, a new custom bottle we designed. Our bottle mold
It's like got an alembic kind of top to it.
Yeah, it's sort of meant to be like a wine bottle meets whiskey bottle, has a nice punt at the bottom too. So our stock bottle during COVID, we got a phone call from our supplier being like, your stock bottle's out of stock. And we're like, how does a stock bottle run out of stock? Like, isn't that the whole purpose of a stock bottle? And so we're like, all right, well, we're just gonna make our own bottle. Like, we're tired of having to be beholden to you guys. I like that the bottles also have like a second life too. So, you know, a lot of times people use these for like water jugs at restaurants, or they'll like saw off the tops and they'll make them into candles, or they'll put them in vases or whatever. And so, you know, now we have our name, you know, physically imprinted forever.
That's cool.
Yeah. So those are some of the challenges we ran into, but you know, I think sometimes those things make you stronger, and it always makes you sort of question, like, why were we doing that before? Like, should we have gone with a non-standard stock bottle a year ago, 10 years ago? Like, would that have helped our route to market if we weren't using the same bottle as like 10 different distilleries? Probably.
That's the best part about challenges, is it forces you to make the question, are we doing this correctly? And now's the time to change if we aren't. If everything's just full steam ahead, you never kind of change directions.
It's true. It's true. The best analogy I used to hear a long time ago, I'll be quick about this, is like they planted a tree inside of one of those biodomes. They're trying to find the best way to see how this tree could grow. And they were feeding it with the best nutrients and the best water and the best everything. And it just kept on falling over. And they're like, why is this tree falling over? And they determined that it actually has to do not so much with like the environment of like what you put on it or the heat or whatever. It's the wind, because the tree wasn't getting anything to push it back, to force it to stay up. And it wasn't facing any challenges that essentially made it sort of become strong enough to stand up. And so it's an interesting way to think about it.
I really like that.
Yeah, from a book called Think Like a Monk. So I can't claim that, but it was one of those COVID reads. But yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. I think people oftentimes, you know, adversity is good. If I didn't go through it, I would probably not be doing this. If I kept on doing my same thing and the financial crisis didn't hit, you know, I might not be in this field.
It's amazing how life just kind of, life happens as you're preparing for something else. Indeed. Now, when you're drinking your whiskey, are you doing it straight? Or are you doing old fashions? What's your favorite way to drink?
It really depends. It depends on what kind of a day you catch me on, what I'm doing. If I'm having the guests at the house, like we'll do Manhattans and Boulevardiers and, you know, whiskey highballs and that sort of stuff. If I've been drinking out of the barrels during the day and trying to like dial in my blends and stuff, like I oftentimes will just be like either like a beer or a nice cold like glass of wine. Like I got no problem with that. That's easy peasy for me.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. Tasting whiskey all like on the regular, like multiple times a day, multiple days a week. Yeah, I mean, it can be tough, you know. Again, like I don't usually drink coffee, and you know, actually I stopped drinking coffee for the most part most of the time. But you stop drinking coffee because of just sort of like it throws off your palate. You don't brush your teeth in the morning until midday because it throws off your palate. You don't usually eat lunch or breakfast that's super spicy. You know what I mean? It's like stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, if I'm drinking, that's how I would do it. Traditional cocktails all do great with my stuff. If you want to do something a little different, like that smoky, you know, a nice smoked Manhattan, if you want to do that with the smoked bourbons or smoked rye whiskeys, those are also really fun. You know, the paper airplane was sort of my cocktail of COVID. You know what I mean?
What's the paper airplane?
Yeah, paper planes are good. I mean, it's literally like 3 ingredients. It's basically like lemon juice, Aperol, and either a rye whiskey or a bourbon.
An apple, okay.
And it's like the goal is to just make it like it's usually neat in an up glass, so it's just super easy to drink. It kind of has like this sort of like slushy, that's like sort of vibe to it. It kind of has like this really easy. Apparently, it was sort of developed by Death and Company founder, just sitting there one day shooting the crap. But yeah, so that was cool. But yeah, I mean, I think I drink a lot of stuff. The only things I really don't drink personally are like IPAs and like super tannic reds. Like I'm not like, if someone's like, I'm gonna get you a bottle of Cab Sauv, I'm like, don't. With all due respect, I don't.
Not to your palate.
No, I mean, again, if I'm drinking whiskey all day long, like, do I need more tannic, chalky things in my mouth? Like, not necessarily.
I think during COVID, I got really into the New York sours. Whiskey, a little splash of wine, and lemon juice. I probably didn't make it quite correctly, but
no, that's cool. Yeah,
wine float on the top's really good.
I love that. Also try a Brooklyn cocktail too. My oldest daughter's named Brooklyn, so that also is cheating because I do those and kind of like, I'm drinking in Brooklyn. But it's, it's basically just a Manhattan, but they use, sweet and dry vermouth, and they use like pecan bitters, but it's delicious too. Our stuff does really well in those sort of things. And, that's part of it too, is if you just look up some recipes online, figure out the ratios, you can kind of play around a lot and sub one thing out, sub out the April, put in Chinar, and next thing you know, you got something that tastes completely different. And
oh yeah.
I think that's sort of the fun stuff about the home cocktailing that I think is also seen some growth, certainly because of COVID.
It is, the whole category is just blown up, and it's only good for you guys. I mean, to be providing that base, because back in the day when I was selling spirits, cocktails were not
back in my day,
way out back in the 90s. No, it's been good to see. Yeah. So as we're kind of wrapping down here, I like to always ask, and you're definitely 10 years of the growth you've had, you're motivated. What keeps you driven?
I think every single day I come to this place and I have no idea what I'm walking into. And sometimes that can be like a pull your hair out, like stressful situation. As you can see, I've already lost most of that. But I think it's the unknown of what that day is going to bring that's really exciting. I also think it's just, the idea that like small nano changes that we make on mash cooking, fermentations, distillations, whatever's today, I could taste those in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And like, I'm just making things like ever so slightly better, even if it's marginally better, even if it's like 1% better than it was before. You do that a whole bunch of times over the course of days, weeks, years, decades, it's going to make for a really good product. And so, hiring some good people here, I've got an amazing staff who supports me in what I do and allows me to do podcasts and stuff like that. I mean, these folks are the smartest people we've ever had in this facility ever. And so that brain trust is making us better and making our products better. And I think in time, it's going to make for when I go to blend that whiskey in 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, whatever, I just have so much more good stuff to work with. And so that gets me really excited.
Sure. Yeah. Also that future, seeing how the raw materials, because you're right now at 3, 4, 5, but give yourself another 20 years, you'll have that just deep pool of things to play around with.
Well, I'd love to do both, right? I'd love to have like the 3, 4, 5s and then have like the 7, 8, 9s. And then, maybe even have some of the 10, 11, 12s. And then you just sort of have like these different pockets of different products that are like, all right, well, this one is meant to be this, one's meant to be that, different price points. Because again, not everybody wants to spend an atrocious amount of money on whiskey, but I like making whiskey for every person. I like having our stuff be that $40 bottle, which is still expensive by some people's standards, but like, it's utility. You can pour it into cocktails, you can pour it neat.
Oh yeah.
That's a good 3, 4, 5-year-old right there.
And then in 2022, a $40 bottles, that's a great price point with everything pushing.
Yeah, I always say it's sort of like where I want to price it so my friends can buy a bottle. Like for a long time when we first started, we were like much more expensive, especially if you look at the smaller, we were using 375s and then now 750s is the full. And so like, my friends couldn't buy my bottles. Like, yeah, we love your stuff, but like the cocktail, the place is like $20. I'm like, I'm sorry. And nowadays to have it be like, $14 for a cocktail, like it makes it feel like your friends can support you. And
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So Adam, we're kind of wrapping down. When can people find out more about you, Corning Company, and Sonoma Distillers?
Yeah. So go to our website. So SonomaDistillingCompany.com, great place for us right there. At Sonoma Whiskey is our handle for Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So Sonoma Whiskey on both of those. You can always join our club if they're interested. If you go to SonomaDistillingCompany.com/club, all information on our club is right there. Sign up page is simple. As I mentioned, it's free. So people can just go on there and join just to know what's going on. And then, we have a newsletter we also send out from time to time too. So if you go to our website as well, you can sign up for our newsletter. It lets you know about all the cool stuff that's going out here. We do cocktail releases and stuff. And, as we start to settle in and we probably have a bit more room, like I'd love to be able to invite people back to the distillery, even if we can't sell the bottles directly, just have open houses and let this sort of be like a Willy Wonka, let people, hang out with the Oompa Loompa situation. Cause like, that's really what I think people want. And that's what I think is missing in at least Northern California. You go to Kentucky, you can do the Bourbon Trail, you kind of do that whole thing. And it's a whole experiential thing. Distilleries, just, there's not a lot of us out here. So, the more we can do that sort of events, I'm excited to do those in the future.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. And again, enjoy the rest of your day. And if anybody has any questions for us, please obviously email us. We'd love to be in touch with everybody who wants to know more about how to make whiskey in Sonoma.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.